Hey guys, oops. Here is a kind of a new demo on making borders around a picture. Because the one I did in the previous attempt, it looked pretty bad in the end. The one that I hand drew, and I just can't let that go. So, okay, so here's my image that I've mostly edited in Camera Raw. Actually, yeah, it's all edited in Camera Raw. Right? Went color to black and white and did other things. Okay, and I'm going to add a couple of different ways to add borders to this. Before I get there, I just wanted to say that something I haven't gone over is this workspace in Photoshop. When you open it up, if you've not opened it, if you've not had Photoshop before, or even if you've had Photoshop before and you haven't changed the default workspace that comes with Photoshop a la, Adobe, you get a bunch of panels on the right that you may or may not like. I don't like them. It takes up a lot of space. They have the color palette over here. They have a bunch of helpful hints on how to do this and that, which can be very helpful if it's completely new to you. But for me, it just is visually distracting. It takes up my workspace, and if you're on a laptop, if your screen is small, I just find it annoying, and I feel like, I just feel like Adobe keeps on imposing more and more stuff on us to make it easier, and I find it frustrating. Okay, so I have customized my workspace here. I have mentioned this in a previous tutorial, but just to reiterate, if you're wondering why your workspace doesn't look like mine, well, it's because I've changed what's visible in the workspace, and I've changed the placement and so on. So if you have panels over here on the right side that you don't want to see, you're going to do stuff like take it out and remove it, right? So let's say you don't want to see notes. Like you're not going to add any notes to your images. So you can drag this out. And this is true for any of these panels. And say notes, click on the X and say goodbye, right? And it's gone. And you can do that with any of these other panels. And you can bring panels that you want to see into your workspace. If I go Window, and this is the list of all the panels. And, honestly, there's a lot of them I don't use. But, they're there. And if you want to pull some out, you can pull them out. Okay, you can customize your workspace that way. And then you can say, hey, I like this setup, or I don't, and change it. But you could say, I like it. Now I want to create it. I want to call it a new workspace, and you call it by something that makes sense to you. I happen to call mine JT1, JT2, etc. Right? So then you can always switch to one of their setups or come back to one of yours. And if you make alterations in any of these workspaces, you can also reset it. Like it says here, reset JT2. So it'll go back to the way I initially set up that workspace. Okay? All right. The toolbar. When you get Photoshop, by default, it's always over here, right? Over on the left where I'm dragging the toolbar, right? I move it around as needed, so I don't have to keep going, all the way over to the left side of my screen, in this case, right? And the toolbar can be doubled up into 2 columns or single. I leave it single. It works for me, and it helps me when I'm teaching. I can tell you that a tool is so far down the toolbar, etc. Okay, all right, jumping on to borders. Okay, here's one easy way to make a border. Open up the layer panel. Okay, here's my layer panel. Right, when you open yours up, if you just open up this image initially, it's most likely going to say background here, right? And it'll have a lock. So you'll have to, if you want it to look like mine, you just click on the lock, and now that layer becomes a regular layer. Okay. Okay, so I am going to add a border by adding what's called a layer style. So if I click on that layer, I get this panel. It says layer style. And over on the left it says styles, and I can do any number of things to this image, basically the border of the image. Right? I can add an inner shadow, inner glow, color overlay, outer glow, all those. What I want to do is add a border, and that will be a stroke. Okay, so I'm going to click on that box, and you watch the edge of this image. As soon as I click on this little checkbox here, I get a black border. around the image. Okay? But one thing that hasn't changed is this property panel, right? I have blending options, but if I want to see the properties for stroke, I have to highlight that layer right there. Okay? Now I can affect the size of the stroke. Right? I can say, do I want the stroke inside or centered or outside? If I go outside, I basically don't see it. But if I had space around the image, then I would see it. Why would I want it outside the image? Well, if I have this stroke on the inside, it's potentially cropping some relevant information within the image. That's not so true in this case. So I'm going to go inside. Okay? I can change the color of this border. It doesn't have to be black. It kind of makes sense with this image. It's black and white. In fact, I rarely make borders any other color than something quite dark. It could be a warmish black or a cool black, but it's generally in that black range. I don't do like, here's my magenta border. That's me. The way to change the color is you click on that color, and now it looks like just black. What do I do? Well, if you move the luminance up, you start to see colors. So maybe you want to give blue a try, or red, or any one of these, right? I don't want those personally. I'm going to take this down and go back to black. Okay. All right. So I could change the blend mode for this border, and by default, the stroke will appear as it does with no recognition of the image that it's going around. Right? If I change that means normal. If I go here and I change the blend mode, it probably won't work so much here with just black and white. But let's see what happens if I go to multiply. Yeah, I mean it's just black. It's not going. There's nothing will happen here. But if, for instance, I had a color photograph and I had a color border, if I change the blend mode, I get this color to interact with the colors in the photograph. Whether you like that or not, that's a matter of personal choice. Or the image. Does it work in the image or not? Okay, this is one way to add a border. So I'll say OK, and you'll see that that stroke ends up as a sublayer here. It's an effect, right? And I can turn it on and off, as I can do with any layer. I can turn that off, turn it on. Right? Do I like it? Not like it? I can say, that's really too bold, too much weight in that stroke. So I click on stroke, double click it actually, and instead of 16 pixels, I'm going to reduce it down to 5, say. Okay. So I get that, like, okay, that's looking a little bit more reasonable, right? Maybe, so I go like that and say, okay, right? And now that I have these sublayers, I can go and save this file. When I do, I'll go just Command S. I'll say Command S. And because it has those sublayers, Photoshop assumes that you want to keep those sublayers, right? So it automatically gives you the file format of Photoshop. Because JPEG, even though it's actually opening up as RAW, but JPEG does not save layers. Okay? The two major file formats that you're using in photography are Photoshop or TIFF and JPEG. I know when you get images off the web, you're increasingly seeing photographs in a PNG format. That was originally created for graphic files, and it's becoming more popular. I'm not sure exactly what that trend's about. If I do not want to keep the layers, I can uncheck layers here. So now I get a Photoshop file that will not allow me to go back and edit it. Okay. All right, I'm going to name this something. Give this a name. I'm going to call it Guy with Glasses. Guy with Glasses, right? And what I like to do is I always leave the number of the file for tracking purposes until I get to the very end, and then I might eliminate it. But I want to be able to correlate this file with the master file, the original raw file. So I leave this number, all that stuff. And then I put notes after that. I'll say, okay, I know that this image, I happen to know it's 1080 pixels, 1080 pix, right? And for me, it has the stroke around there, and I'm leaving it so I can edit it. I call it a project file, and I designate that with PROJ, right? And then I give it tags, right? I give it portrait. This happened to be in Brooklyn, right? And I give it those tags, right? And then I save it in a folder. Like this comes from this folder that's highlighted right here. And then within that, so that I don't have to look through all of the raw files, I create a subfolder called selected, right? And I'll save it inside there, right? And I happen to think, I think I've got a version of this already, so I'm going to say -2, version 2, right? Now save this, okay? All right, so now the name up in the tab says Guy with Glasses. It's the file number, 1080 pix, PROJ.psd. Okay. All right, so that is one way to create a border, right? Okay, let's turn this off and let's get rid of that effect. So I am going to, I'm just going to back up. I'm going to go into the history panel here, and I'm going to go back there. I'm going to go all the way back to make layer, right? The history panel, by the way, creates 20 steps, okay? And once you get to the 21st step, in other words, something you've done in Photoshop to an image, you've changed its contrast, you've changed, something or other. Every time you do that, it gets recorded in history. And then the 21st step means that the very first step will get deleted, right? So you have 20 steps to back up, okay? So just so you know, if you did 4 things and now you're freaked out because your image looks weird, go into history, back up, okay? Okay, so now I'm going to show you another way to add a border. The thing with the stroke is it makes a very crisp, kind of graphic looking border, which can be the thing that you need for a particular photograph, or maybe it's just your style. Okay. But what happens if it's a photograph that needs a little bit more of a soft touch to it? Okay, so now I'm going to add a border that has been painted on instead of created graphically. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that image. It's sitting on what's called the canvas, which we don't see right now, but there's actually underneath, kind of virtually, there's a canvas. Okay? We're going to expand the canvas. Okay? I'm going to do that by going up to Image in the top menu, and I'm going to come down to Canvas Size. And on a Mac, the keystroke is Command-Option-C. Right? On a PC, that would be Control-Alt-C. So I go there. Okay, now here's the dialog window for changing the canvas. Okay, I want to add a little bit more dimension, a little bit more canvas to it. So I'm going to go, instead of 1515, I'm going to go 15.2 by 15.2. Okay. And this little box down at the bottom says, well, where do you want the image that's sitting on the canvas to be positioned? And in this case, I want it centrally located. If I wanted to put 2 images side by side, I could say, hey, I want the image that's here now to be on the left, and I'm going to place an image to the right. I'm not doing that, no. So I'm going to keep it centered. So I say, OK, and now I have a little extra space around the image. Right? So now I'm going to use the brush, and I'm going to paint a black border. Okay, so I'm going to go to the brush tool, which is B, by the way, and any of these tools here, when they have a little white checkbox at the bottom right-hand corner, if you press and hold, you can select multiple tools under there. In Photoshop, the pencil and the brush are grouped together, for instance. Okay. All right, so now I'm on the brush tool, And I have the properties for the brush tool up here in the properties bar. You can also see the properties for the brush over here. It's a little bit overwhelming. I'm not going to use it. Okay, you can use it. You have all of these different types of brushes to choose from here. Right? I'm going to leave that, close that up. And up here I can say, all right, here's the brush. Okay, I have a more limited selection of brushes. Right? And I'm going to choose, it could be any one. I kind of want a brush with a feathered edge. Right? So I could use this one. I wouldn't want this crisp brush. Right? If I'm doing a crisp brush, I might as well just add the stroke that we just did. Something that's a little bit feathered, I could try adding a texture that does or does not work. So I'm going to try, I'll just go with this one, it'll be nice and easy. Okay, up in the very top, I can set the brush size. Okay, to me that's not very helpful because the size of the brush here, 81 pixels, it really depends on the resolution of the image. 81 pixels in a small 72 ppi image will make a big brush. 82 pixels in a gargantuan raw file that's 5,000 pixels on the long side will make a small brush. So instead of using that for sizing, I bring the brush out here where I can actually see the size of the brush, and I use the right bracket to make the brush bigger. Oops, let me go up here. I use the right brush to make the tool bigger. The right bracket key on your keyboard, left bracket key to make it smaller. Right makes it bigger, left makes it smaller. Okay, but I do use this all the time, hardness. Okay, now because of the brush I chose, this very soft brush, it has 0 hardness. It's very much feathered. It might be too much. I have a feeling it will be, so I'm going to take it up a bit. Right, I'll try 40 hardness. Okay, it also, in the properties bar, you'll see here, it has this little icon. Because I chose that brush, it's pressure sensitive. And if I'm just using a mouse like I am right now, this is irrelevant. My mouse has no pressure sensitivity. My stylus and tablet do. So if I switch over to that, I might want to use that. I'm going to turn it off though. I'm going to make sure opacity, in this case, is up at 100% and flow is at 100%. So I'll get a strong black border. Obviously my brush is too big for this picture. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, zoom out. Okay, and I'm going to make the brush smaller with my left bracket key. Right? I'll make it intentionally a little bit large, this stroke, so it's visible. All right, now I could try, like I did in my previous attempt, to try to draw this freehand, and to be honest with you, oops, I just noticed something. I've noticed 2 things. Okay, hold on a second. I want to add a new layer to the layer panel before I start painting. Okay, so that I can, if I don't do that, I'm going to be painting right on the photograph, and it'll be hard to get rid of those paint marks. So I'm going to add a new layer in the layer panel. Right? Here's my layer panel. And if I want to name it, I can double click on the name and say border. Okay, so here's border. Now I'll paint in that. And I also noticed that my color swatch is set on a tan color. Okay, so my brush would be painting tan. I don't want a tan border. Okay, so I click on that color swatch. I want a black border. Okay, again, the color you use is up to you. Personally, I kind of like colors that are not colors. I like black. I would not put like an orange color unless I wanted to be playful and colorful, and you can do that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm on my brush and I have this do not, cannot, circle, crossed out circle. What is going on? I can't paint. What's going on? I need to highlight the layer that I want to paint on. Now I can paint. Okay. So I'm going to click on the edge here, click, and I'm going to try to freehand this, and I'll do a lousy job of it. I'm using my mouse for one thing. Right? Freehand, trying to make a straight line, relatively straight line. And granted, part of the reason I'm doing this anyway is to get kind of a funky, wavy line. But I'm running into the same problem I had with the previous demo. I get this squirrely line. It's kind of a drag. Okay, so I'm going to Command Z, undo that. Here's another way to apply a line here, and I'm going to go click and then press Shift. And Shift constrains the movement of the brush into a straight line, whether that's vertical or horizontal. I'm going to click again, press Shift, drag down, click, Shift, get a straight line, click, and Shift. Now you might be wondering, like, well, why did you expand the canvas? And what's the point of that? Because you have this border, and now you have this extra bit of picture running around the edge, right? Okay, let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. Oops, sorry about that. Zoomed in more than I wanted. Okay, so the reason I created the extra border was so that the outside edge of my paintbrush mark here would also be soft. Right? It's feathered. So the inside is feathered and the outside is feathered. If I hadn't expanded the canvas and I just painted along the edge of this, I would get a crisp edge on the outside, soft on the inside. That's a possibility. It's not like you have to do exactly what I'm doing, right? You could have a crisp edge on the outside and feathered on the inside, right? I wouldn't say often, I do sometimes use another type of brush that gives me more texture, and I get a different kind of thing happening out here, right, in terms of texture. And I might also apply that stroke, the paintbrush mark in a different way too, so it looks a little bit more organic. Okay, so now you might be wondering about this checkerboard thing, the canvas. Well, if I export this image now, if I save it as a JPEG, for one thing, if I save it as JPEG, this border layer will get basically collapsed into the picture layer. If I save it as a JPEG, right? The other thing that will happen when I save it as a JPEG, that this extra space around the image will render as white, okay? Which could be a problem, maybe it's not a problem. If I make a print of it on white paper, it's not a problem. If I make a print of it on something else, I'm going to see a white border around that, right? If I export this as a JPEG and I put it up in a website, that white border is going to render, right? If the background of that website is white, it could be just fine. Right? If for some reason it's in a website that has some color, that white edge around the picture is a problem. Okay? And this is one of the reasons to save a photograph as a PNG file. A PNG file will read this extra space, the canvas, as transparency. And basically, you won't see that extra space, aside from the actual size of the image, by the way. But you'll have this soft, feathered black stroke running around your photograph. Okay? All right, while we're here, remember you can turn on and off layers like this, right? And if I export this now with that border turned off, I won't see the border. Okay. What else about that? I could, if I wanted to, and we talked about layer styles in here. Again, it wouldn't work with this black and white, but I could say, okay, what happens if I change from this normal to one of these blend modes? And you actually do see some blend modes happening here, right? Even though it's black and white. Right? I don't think any of these are going to work for what I'm doing here. Right? If it were color on color, that might be a thing. I can also say, well, I don't like the black as it is. I'm going to turn the opacity down. So now I see just a little bit of the image going through that border, but also the edge of the image makes this crisp line too, which I don't really like. So I'm going to go back up to 100%. Okay, so I say, okay, this is very cool. I'm going to save this now. I'm going to go save it as a project file, as a PSD, which means it's editable. I can come back and change that border, remove the border, do whatever I want. I could save it as a PNG if I just go Command Save As, which is File, Save As, Command Shift S. Right? And I can say, well, I want this as a PNG because I want that very outer edge to render as transparency. Right? I can go PNG. Right? So I'll just do that. I go PNG, and then I say out here, I try to anyway, I always give some tags in case I'm trying to find images. Right? And these tags are relatively large groups of types of photographs, locations. You can decide what is relevant in there. Make sure it goes in the right folder. Right? Say OK, and that'll save as a PNG. Okay, so that's adding a border to a photograph. Okay, so add that to some of your photographs. See what it looks like. Okay, thanks a lot.